Hello everyone and welcome to this video. I will be taking you through the analysis of the Maharashtra MBA CET 22, which was conducted over 3 days from August 23rd to 25th. We'll be talking about the individual sections. We'll talk also about the difficulty across the different slots which happened, and then we'll talk a little bit about the next steps and the cutoffs. So let's get started. So let's start with the overall analysis first. Now, if you look at the test overview, the test did not have any sectional breakup as it was the case for CET 21 as well. And this time there was no negative marking as again it has always been the case. If you look at the problem with the test, there was a significant difference in the level of difficulty across different slots. So day 1, slot 1, and there was only one slot on day 1. That was considered to be the easiest of all the slots which were conducted. Whereas day 2 was found to be significantly more difficult compared to day 1 slot 1. And lastly, the area distribution wasn't consistent across the slots. So slot 1 had almost same bifurcation or similar splitting as the traditional CET, wherein you had nearly 75 questions of logical reasoning, 25 questions of AR, 50 questions each of quant and verbal. But if you look at day 2 or day 3, they did not follow the same bifurcation or distribution. And that is why students found it a little difficult also to adapt to something like this, where in one particular slot, the number of questions of AR were only 8 to 10, whereas in the other slot, there were say 25 questions of AR. And that is why this CET was challenging. The way in which it was conducted was not the ideal way in which a test should be conducted, wherein the test authority should try to put questions which are equal in difficulty, or rather the slots overall should have similar difficulty and similar bifurcation. But that was not the case with CET 22. Even in CET 21, the same problem was observed. Now let's talk about the number of questions and the overall difficulty. So as we know, these are the 4 broad areas that are tested on the CET: quantitative aptitude, logical reasoning, VARC, and abstract reasoning. As we discussed, the number of questions were different in different slots under each of these areas, but total 200 questions to be attempted over 150 minutes. Marking scheme was +1 and there was no negative marking. With respect to the level of difficulty, as I said, day 1 was observed to be the easiest, day 3 was observed to be the moderate, easy to moderate, and day 2 was actually found to be the most difficult one. Now let's start talking about the individual sections. Now let's start with quant and data interpretation. So in this area, it was dominated by arithmetic, numbers, and algebra in most of the slots, with nearly 25 questions appearing from the most dominant area. For example, in slot 1, arithmetic was the dominant area with nearly 25 questions together from arithmetic. Approximately 9 to 12 questions in each of the slots were from geometry, P&C, probability combined, so the weightage on these topics was kept at a minimum. In some slots, there were no questions on data interpretation, which was surprising because traditionally you would have observed that CET asks generally 10, 15, 20 questions when it comes to data interpretation. But there were some slots wherein there was absolutely no DI, whereas in some slots there were up to 18 questions which were asked from the data interpretation. Data sufficiency was also dominant in some of the papers, and in some papers it didn't make an appearance. It was asked in most of the slots, but in some cases the questions were only 5, whereas in some cases there were nearly 20 questions asked from the data sufficiency area. So overall, the number of questions made it challenging in some cases because you had more questions. Somebody was, let's say, good at math would have enjoyed that particular section, but somebody who was not good at math would have found it a little difficult. The actual difficulty of the questions was not that high, so the questions could be categorized absolutely as either easy to moderate, but because the number of questions varied, it would have been a challenge for a different set of students. Let's start talking about the next area. Now, when it comes to abstract reasoning, analogy, series, and odd figure out, these were the only 3 types of questions which were asked across the different slots. Slot 1 had highest number of AR questions, which was 25, but there were some slots where there were only 8 questions from abstract reasoning or visual reasoning. Now, the questions asked were overall easy to moderate, so no complexity was involved. But again, the random question types were not found, but the number of questions being different in different slots would have made it a challenging affair for people. When it comes to verbal and reading comprehension area, in different slots, 15 to 25 questions appeared from reading comprehension, and the number of passages varied from 3 to 6. The RCs were pretty straightforward to read. The complexity or the subjects from which these RCs were picked were not very difficult. Vocab and grammar questions were 25 to 40 in number, and the question types were again very standard question types that you see on the verbal ability section. Fill in the blanks, synonyms, antonyms, replacing part with error, identifying part with the error, root words, prefix, suffix, so on and so forth. Now, overall, RCs were found to be easier compared to the verbal section. And that happens a lot because in verbal, especially when it comes to grammar and vocabulary, either you know what the error is or you don't, or either you know a word or you don't. And that is why RCs were found to be easier to crack compared to the verbal part of the test. Now let's start talking about the most dominant area in the entire paper, which is logical reasoning. So within LR, it was dominated by LR caselets with 35 to 45 questions appearing from different sort of arrangements, linear arrangement, circular arrangement, and matrix arrangement. The other part of LR was essentially nearly 20 to 40 questions across different slots, and the topics asked were standard LR topics: blood relations, coding, decoding, direction-based questions, selection criteria, which made appearance in some of the slots. Calendar and clocks again was asked in some slots, was not asked in some slots. So there was a lot of variation across different slots in terms of the composition of the LR section. Overall, LR was found to be a difficult area, as it has always been the case. So if you compare the difficulty of, let's say, LR with something like a verbal, you would always find LR to be much more challenging to solve. So overall, LR was difficult compared to the other sections across the slots that were conducted for this CET. Now let's start talking about the next steps. So the result should be out within 2 to 3 weeks, looking at the trend that has been followed for the other CETs conducted by CET Cell. The architecture CET or the hotel management CET were conducted in August first week, and their results have already been announced. So looking at that trend, I think within 2 to 3 weeks, the MBA CET result should also be released. Now, after CET result, you're going to have a centralized admission process called CAP, which will help you get admit to respective B schools. It's a process wherein you fill only one form and you put all the college preferences in it. Now, it is recommended that you start getting all the documents ready beforehand, because in your CAP process, you're going to need all the documents such as category certificate, domicile certificate if you're eligible for it. So make sure that you start working on getting these documents in place. And lastly, evaluate other options as well. So in terms of NMAT SNAP 22, which will be conducted starting from October, SNAP is going to happen in December. And then in addition to these, maybe you can also look at the PGDM programs offered by other institutes. Because a lot of colleges have already started, some of the colleges might still have an option to apply for the PGDM programs. They might be taking students. So you might want to evaluate these options as well, in addition to the core MMS programs that you'll be trying for through the centralized admission process. Now let me talk about the part for which I guess everybody is interested or watching this video, which is the cutoffs. And what you have on screen is the CET 21 cap round 2 cutoffs in terms of percentile. You can keep this with you so that once the results are out, you can look at the percentile cutoffs of last year and make an estimate as to which college you might have a shot at. Now, the percentile cutoffs are more reliable compared to the score cutoffs, because the scores keep changing from year to year. The percentile cutoffs don't change that much. And that is why we have given the percentile cutoffs. I think you can keep this with you, take a screenshot so that, or whenever you want to have a look at it, you can come back to this video and check out the cutoffs as well. I also have these cutoffs in terms of score, which I'm going to show you. And why I'm going to do that is because this year the cutoffs are going to change, but we'll have a look at it and then we'll talk about what could be the impact this year on the cutoff in terms of marks. So what you're seeing on screen right now are the same cutoffs, but in terms of marks. As I said, percentile cutoffs are more reliable because they don't change often from year to year, whereas marks cutoff change a lot from year to year. But this tells you a story. So last year also similar things had happened when it came to CET. Across different slots, the difficulties were different. Some slots were found to be very easy compared to the others and so on. The distribution of areas was not the same. And after all of that, the topper was at 166, JB cutoff was 136 for cap round 2 for the state students. So now when you look at this data, you need to have a look at this and keep it with you, because this year the cutoffs are going to go up. So we believe that across the categories, the cutoffs could go up by 5 to 10 marks because of the fact that this year's CET overall was found to be slightly easier compared to the last year's CET. So in terms of our estimate of what the cutoffs could be, the cutoffs might go up by 5 to 10 marks, as I said, across the different categories this time. And that is because of the reported difficulty of day 1 and day 3, which was easier compared to day 2. And of course, overall also it was found to be easier than last year's CET. Now, normalization will be done by equipercentile method. That is something that they have revealed on the website. Now, when it comes to equipercentile method, you don't really have to get into the exact method by which they do it, because ultimately whatever score and percentile you will get, you will not really be able to challenge that. So rather than spending too much time into trying to figure out what the impact of normalization could be, I suggest that you focus on the next steps for you. Because the scores reported are normalized and there's no way to figure out what exactly was the scaling. So last year, for example, a lot of students who had attempted more questions and possibly might have scored higher reported lower scores because maybe their scores were scaled down. Whereas some students had actually attempted lower questions and would have had lower scores, actually got a higher score because of the normalization and scaling up of their scores. So that is why it's not something that we should be spending too much time on. Also, there could be an impact of the delay in CET itself. A lot of good candidates would have joined other institutes by now, and that also changes a lot of things in the equation. Last year, what happened was we were hoping that CET was going to be conducted in April, May, June, and so on, and there was no clarity whatsoever. But this time, because the CET was delayed last year, a lot of people I know have already joined some institutes and are taking CET just for specific colleges. So I was talking to a student and found that he has already joined a college, but now is taking CET only for JPMS. There are a lot of other students who would have joined some great institutions. Now, if they get a lower CET score or if they don't get the best college through CET, they're definitely going to be out of the race. And that is going to have impact on the cutoffs as well. And that is why don't spend too much time on thinking what the final cutoffs could be. Once the results are out, we'll have a much better idea. And the percentile cutoffs that we have shared, those are the important ones. You can keep those with you. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this analysis of CET has helped you guys. In case you have any questions, feel free to comment on this video and we'll be happy to answer it. Now, when it comes to next steps, centralized admission process will be starting post the result. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel because we'll be making videos which will help you to get through that process quickly. So thanks for watching. Wish all of you all the best for the results and see you in the next one.